Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Newsflash. We have some very interesting new news about the Ted Cruz situation. You have all been following all day long since literally probably the most unlikable person in American politics, regardless of party, probably did the worst thing a politician could ever do, which is when his state is suffering the worst energy crisis in recent memory, in modern times for that state. People with no electricity, people with no access to water, people freezing, people struggling to survive. Ted Cruz and his family decided to do nothing else than jet to Cancun, a nice vacation spot for him as his constituents struggle back home. New reporting by the New York Times reveals their leaked texts and how they planned the trip, and another embarrassing blow for one of the most mocked politicians I can think of. Also, we give you more about the details of this water crisis, crack pipes, frozen wells, and offline treatment plants, how water is now becoming the next big thing as opposed to electricity. And finally, trouble in New York on the Democratic side. Andrew Cuomo facing real pushback for the first time for his drastic mishandling of the coronavirus crisis, especially with regards to nursing homes and how the fact he covered it up, asked other people to do it for him, and threatened political destruction to those who didn't serve his will. This is Newsflash. Welcome to the show. We do have to start with this absolutely remarkable story today. Ted Cruz heading to Cancun as, literally, I almost feel bad for them, but I really don't, because nothing is really sacred for this family that just seems to be like completely cursed by hell to be humiliated in every way, shape, or form. And a lot of times they do it to themselves. We saw them all the way back. Ted Cruz's wife getting assaulted, called ugly by Donald Trump, in person, completely personally. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Ted Cruz then, of course, loyally defending Donald Trump throughout the 4 years of his presidency to save his own political career. And now he is off to Cancun, now back, of course, with his tail tucked ashamedly between his legs in kind of a very sad and kind of dejected way at this point. He's already taken on the political hit he's going to take. I mean, at this point, you could probably just enjoy the beach. That's what you've done it, so why not just do it, you know? But here he is. He's coming back. He's back at the airport today facing a barrage of cameras, and to add insult to injury, his wife's personal texts were leaked to the New York Times. So when you hear the reporting from the New York Times, like millions of his constituents across Texas, Senator Ted Cruz had a frigid home without electricity this week amid the state's power crisis. But unlike most, Mr. Cruz got out, fleeing Houston and hopping on a Wednesday afternoon flight to Cancun with his family for a respite at a luxury resort. And I mean, honestly, it's still surprising that they had flights going out of there in the first place, but I guess things might have calmed down a little bit. But yeah, they really just got out of there. The kids, Heidi, they were all out of there. Photos of Cruz and his wife Heidi boarding the flight ricocheted quickly across social media. And again, this is just an absolute. First, could we just take a play? Because we didn't talk about this back on Tuesday, because of course it hadn't happened yet. But I mean, we just have to take a moment and process for a second, the absolute absurdity of what he did here. He knew he was going to go to a public airport completely. He knew, he had to have known he was going to get seen in some way by social media, and he would be completely found out for what he did. But he still did it anyway. What does that tell you? It's either extreme stupidity, or it's arrogance, incompetence, just the self-assured proposition that I can literally get away with anything. Nobody is gonna come and hold me accountable or challenge me in any way, shape, or form. That is the only that is the clear indication of what he's thinking here. And I mean, in large part, he could probably be right. I mean, with his electoral prospects as far as they're concerned, but a completely devastating and absolutely inexplicable political blunder. Because again, he was doing this. He was in a public airport. He wasn't hiding. He was showing his face out there to tons of people who know who he is, and were like, "What is this? Is crazy. What is Ted Cruz doing on my flight to Mexico while there is not only, again, a pandemic going on, but his state is going through a natural crisis, like a natural disaster with the amount of people who are out of power, the amount of people who don't have access to water. The blowback only intensified as Cruz, a Republican, released a statement that he'd flown to Mexico to be a good dad, quote unquote, and accompany his daughters and their friends. He noted he was flying back to Thursday afternoon, though he did not disclose how long he originally intended to stay. Of course, the implication there being, no surprise, that, oh yeah, I was just going to go drop my daughters off for a play date at Cancun. Like, my daughters wanted to go. And you're really going to get mad at my daughters? Come on. Like, what a Ted Cruz move. Just be like, yeah, it was my daughters who wanted to do this trip. But it does appear, it probably, like, based on these texts, it appears that at least Heidi was doing it, maybe on behalf of the daughters, who knows. But yeah, text messages sent from Mrs. Cruz to friends and Houston neighbors on Wednesday revealed a hastily planned trip. So, like, this stuff, again, it was leaked. It was literally leaked. Their house was freezing, as Cruz put it, and Mrs. Cruz, and she proposed a getaway until Sunday. Heidi invited the others to join them at the Ritz-Carlton, where they had stayed, quote, many times, noting the room price this week, which is $309 per night. It was like a great little jab in there by the New York Times, just to be like, what is this guy doing? How stupid can one person be? So the text messages were provided to the New York Times and then confirmed by a second person on the thread who declined to be identified because of the private nature of the text. Like, imagine, put yourself, like, the idea, you're texting a private, like, friend and you're inviting them to Cancun and then just like, oh, yeah, it's up in the press. Like, that is tough. That is brutal. But, of course, they absolutely deserve it here. So for more than 12 hours after the airport departure photos first emerged, Cruz's office declined to comment on his whereabouts. The Houston police confirmed that the senator's office had sought their assistance for his airport trip on Wednesday, and eventually Cruz was spotted wheeling his suitcase in Mexico on Thursday as he returned to the state he represents in the Senate. As the Cruzes were away, millions of Texans were still without electricity. Many had no running water, and the icy air that swept the state was so severe that FEMA had been activated to send supplies, including generators. Some searched neighborhood for discarded fallen trees to burn for warmth. Like, it was chaos. It was nomadic, like, the level of craziness that was going on there. Like, it was just, it's like people are literally being, like, returned to nomadic hunter-gatherer people in Texas. Like, look, imagine looking around your neighborhood for tree wood, fallen tree wood to burn. Like, that just is awful. And meanwhile, here he is in Cancun. It is really just a political mistake beyond comprehension. And here he goes. He's back in Texas. He's telling a television crew what's happening in Texas is unacceptable. And here he is in a clip. Oh, we gotta turn on the audio there. Just a quick second.
And Texas is going through horrific storms, and millions of Texans have lost power and lost heat and have been hurt. And our family was among them. We had no heat and no power. And yesterday, my daughters asked if they could take a trip with some friends, and Heidi and I agreed, so I flew down with them last night, dropped them off here, and now I'm headed back to Texas and back to continuing to work to try to get the power on. What's happening in Texas is unacceptable, and a lot of Texans are hurting.
Yeah, so there you go. We're just out there, just drop it off my daughters for a play. It was always going to be heading right back, as I'm sure you always assumed. So he said he was just rocking that state flag mask, short sleeve polo shirt tucked into his jeans, and of course they have to include, I love this in the New York Times, the temperature in Cancun was above 80 degrees Fahrenheit on Thursday, and it was in the 30s in Houston. After landing back in the United States, Cruz offered a new statement with a different tone from earlier in the day, where he tried to explain the vacation without regrets and left the impression that it might have always been a one-day trip for him. Of course. Speaking to reporters about his arrival home, he conceded the trip was obviously a mistake, and he said he had begun having second thoughts as soon as he boarded the plane to Mexico, intent on a few days of remote work in the sun. The plan had been to stay, of course, obviously making the confession that he really couldn't hide for very long because it was clearly obvious. He was walking around with a massive suitcase. He wasn't just going to stay for one night. The plan had been to stay through the weekend with my family, said, framing the decisions as a parent's attempt to placate his two daughters, ages 10 and 12, after a tough week. So, yeah, again, something that obviously all people can do, all people love to do in Texas, just get on the plane, just head to a $309 a night Cancun resort, just take away the pain, And again, of course, it was his daughter's fault. It's just such a Ted Cruz, such a Ted Cruz move, you cannot get more quintessentially Ted Cruz if you could have, even pictured it. Hey, man's never been in when it shut down. Join us this Friday, tomorrow, at around 9 for another Live Uncultured. We're going to be getting into some Grime, some Skepta, some Stormzy, and so much more. It's Uncultured, the best mixed show in the game. Always live on Spreaker.com/TSWS and always available on demand. Gotta love Skepta, one of the original grime artists there. Surely not the original, but definitely one of the pioneers. Grime pioneer. We'll talk about him. We'll talk about Stormzy. We'll talk about all the culture there, and really fascinating area of rap that had a lot of influence on American rap. But anyway, we now turn our attention to some less fun things to talk about, and that is, of course, the Texas blackout. Power, according to New York Times here, power began to flicker back on across much of Texas on Thursday, but millions across the state confronted another dire crisis, a shortage of drinkable water as the pipes cracked, wells froze, and water treatment plants were knocked offline. So a pretty devastating kind of 1-2 punch of the fact that they just were not ready for the power outages, and so they didn't really have time to prepare the water treatment centers to deal with that. And of course, the pipes that are all connected with them were really hurt. So, not a place where you want to have acute problems with this is the hospitals, and that's really where they're having some of the most problems. One in Austin was forced to move some of its most critically ill patients to another building when its faucets ran dry. Another in Houston had to haul in water on trucks in order to flush toilets. It was just an absolute mess. People, again, really being reduced to a nomadic, hunter-gathering state. And it's in the hospitals in some, the biggest cities in the state, in an absolutely horrific situation here. But for many of the state's residents stuck at home, the emergency meant boiling the tap water that trickled down their faucets, scouring stores for bottled water, or boiling icicles and dirty snow on their stoves. For others, it meant no water at all. Denise Gonzalez had joined a crowd at a makeshift relief center in a working-class corner of West Dallas on Thursday, where volunteers handed out food from the luggage compartment of a charter bus. Back at her apartment, she said the lights were finally back on, but her pipes were frozen. She could not bathe, shower, or use the toilet. She'd been calling plumbers all day, but one of the few who answered her told her it would be $3,000 to come and assess the damage. $3,000! Gonzalez said, if I had $3,000, I wouldn't be getting food from people on the bus. So, again, this is just a perfect example of just, the disaster capitalism system. Just every system that's supposed to come into place to stop these things have just, all the supposed points of resistance that anything like this should have, this situation that should have stopped this situation from happening. Each one of them, how about we buy winter? First of all, how about we stop launching fossil fuels in the air to make the climate, or to screw up the climate and to screw up with the polar vortex? Or how about maybe we can buy winter modulators for both the natural gas and oil systems and the wind turbines and all that stuff. How about we do that so things can work when it's 30 degrees?